morning. This is week 3 of the Cultural Geography of the United Kingdom, and today I'd like to talk with you about London. This is a broad subject. We could have an entire course on geography, history, cultural significance, literary and artistic representations of London. I think there is a course like that in the Institute, so if you're interested, you're very welcome to it. For the sake of this course, we only have 1 week, and of course we can elaborate on this during the live meeting, but what I would like to focus on is really the map of London and the administrative division of London into the so-called London boroughs. The term borough means a separate administrative unity, like a town. So originally these were separate towns surrounding London that gradually were included into the Greater London area. They still have quite a lot of self-government, and each has their own town hall really, but of course London, being the capital of the United Kingdom, has gradually got some unified structure. Mostly in the 19th century. We may end up talking about it at some later stage. Because first of all, if you want to talk about London, and especially the geography of London, London is a very palimpsestic place. It means you have layers of history, of meaning, of interest, of culture, one on top of the other. So whatever your interest, whether you're interested in the ancient Roman history or the medieval period or any period after this, or if you're interested in art or literature or basically anything, sports, you name it, you will find something of interest in London. This is one of the most interesting cities I've seen in my life, and I've seen quite a few. So I've been there many times, so many I cannot count them, but I would go again at basically at any moment, because there are so many interesting places, so many museums, so many relics of history and culture spread throughout the entire area, and not only the inner city but the outer parts of the Greater London area. That absolutely, I hope if you haven't visited London yet, you will have the opportunity to do it. So first of all, let's look at the map with the London boroughs. As you can see, there are quite a few of them, and they could be divided into like 2 parts, with the City of London, the central, smallest perhaps, core of the city, established by the Romans originally, then the inner boroughs and the outer boroughs, so like the inner circle of the boroughs surrounding the City of London, and the outer circle surrounding them. So as you can see, that's it. I will probably expect you to familiarize yourself with this map. Either just copy the map and try to remember the names, so there are some memory aids. We'll talk about them during the live meeting, so it's doable. It's doable. So let's look at the first borough. So the City of London, the central part. You'll have some other names on the slide, and these are the names of the local areas, the neighbourhoods within the City of London. So places like Blackfriars, Holborn, Farringdon and Temple. You may hear these locations, these are all places within the area of the City of London, which is, as you can see, right in the very centre of Greater London. They have their own symbols, they have their own version of St. George's flag with this red sword, as you can see. They have their own coat of arms with the dragons. I hope you can see that. You can see these symbols as part of decorations on buildings in parks, mostly in the City of London, because they refer to the City of London. Some areas within the City of London refer to churches that used to be there. Some of them are still there, like the Temple Church that originally housed the Knights Templar. This is one of the oldest churches in London, with beautiful tomb effigies of the Templar Knights, for example. And the other example is Blackfriars, which was a monastery, I think, of the Dominican monks. So this is the area which is now mostly the business centre. This was the area that was very badly hit by the Great Fire of London in 1666. So it was greatly rebuilt afterwards. So now you have to really look for the remains of anything older than the 18th century. On top of that, this is the area with the skyscrapers, with some of the business headquarters. So here we have a few photographs. Of course, the most important monument is St. Paul's Cathedral. This is not the original church. The original St. Paul's Cathedral was in the Gothic style, but it was so badly destroyed during the Great Fire that a decision was made to commission a very successful and talented architect, Sir Christopher Wren, to design the new cathedral. And as you can see, it looks a little bit like St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, and this is deliberate. This was the Protestant answer to St. Peter's Cathedral. So the idea was to kind of outdo the major Catholic cathedral in Rome. So we have this classicist building with the huge dome. You can see this dome from very many places in the city. This was completed in the early 18th century, so this is not a very old church. There are some, very few, churches that survived the Great Fire, and also there are some churches that were rebuilt and redesigned by Sir Christopher Wren, mostly also in the City of London. We'll talk about them perhaps a little bit later. We have the monument, this massive column. This is actually the monument commemorating the Great Fire of London, which destroyed this part of the city mostly, and of course the rebuilding of the city. Luckily, not many people died. This was an accident. If you know anything about medieval cities and even Renaissance cities, they used a lot of wooden constructions or half-timbered constructions, and a small fire in some bakery started to spread in an uncontrollable way and destroyed a lot of the city, and then of course it was rebuilt in the new style. So I mentioned we have the business headquarters, we have the Royal Exchange, so again a classicist building housing the headquarters of the trading companies and the market, the main exchange building for mass market. We have some famous modern skyscrapers from the 20th century like the Walkie Talkie or the Gherkin, which are named of course because of their shapes. So that's the City of London. However, probably the most historically interesting borough is the City of Westminster. So these two places, the City of London and the City of Westminster, have the city in their name, and Westminster was just the next town from London. So soon enough it was included into the geography of London and unified. So they have their own symbols, and they have a lot of famous places, a lot of monuments. I just list a few areas, or more than a few, because this is the most important place in London. The City of Westminster houses Covent Garden, Hyde Park, Marylebone, Mayfair, Millbank, Regent's Park, St James's Park and neighbourhood, St John's Wood, Soho, South Kensington, the Strand, Victoria, Victoria Embankment, Westminster, the West End and Whitehall. So some of these places I hope you know already, like Covent Garden, the old market, the beautiful market hall still used. And the opera house in London is called Covent Garden Opera for a reason. We also have some famous parks like Regent's Park and St James's Park and Hyde Park, with all the interesting places that happen there historically, like the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park, and that still continue to happen. These parks are very interesting in their own right. We have some places connected to, for example, to the theatres. West End is definitely part of the very important area called the Theatreland. This is the place, well, it's quite, West End is divided between two boroughs, the City of Westminster and Tower Hamlets. No, not the Tower Hamlets. And guess it was it Camden? Yes, Camden. So part of West End is in the City of Westminster, another part is in Camden. The same about Regent's Park. Actually, it's bigger, so it's you'll see the other location as well. So we have this gathering, this grouping of theatres, and of course the theatre life in London is absolutely wonderful and fascinating. Whitehall, on the other hand, is connected with the government offices, with the site of power. This is really where the most important offices of state are, like the ministries, the Home Office, the Foreign Office. Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives and has their office, is also a little street just off Whitehall. You may want to look at the map of London if you have any guidebook. It's a good idea to open the guidebook on the map of London. We'll talk about the guidebooks later on today, but just any map of London, so you'll see the location of these places. Whitehall, for example, is the street that connects the Palace of Westminster, that is the site of the Parliament, with Trafalgar Square. So another beautiful square. We have some interesting squares there, like Piccadilly Circus and Trafalgar Square. Trafalgar Square houses, of course, the column of Admiral Nelson, but also the National Gallery of paintings. We have Westminster Abbey, one of the UNESCO sites in London. There are some smaller churches surrounding Westminster Abbey, and they have the UNESCO status together. We'll talk about UNESCO sites at a different moment. This is the area where Buckingham Palace, so the official London residence of the Queen, is situated. So lots of interesting places happening in the city of Westminster, even more than in the city of London, because it was less damaged during the fire. Then we have some more boroughs. Another one is Kensington and Chelsea. This is the area of some very elegant residential areas. Historically, these were the residences of the very rich. So Chelsea and Belgravia, they were very fashionable places. This is near Kensington Gardens, so Kensington Gardens is situated there. Knightsbridge, Notting Hill, so the areas within the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and also the area called Albertopolis, or the Museum Quarter. This is the area which was developed after the Great Exhibition, with the profits of the Great Exhibition. The central place there is Royal Albert Hall, the great concert venue. And there are also some museums like Victoria and Albert Museum, the Natural History Museum, the Science Museum. They were all built on the profits of the Great Exhibition, and they are situated close together, and this area is called Albertopolis, in memory of the husband of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert. There is a wonderful, big, very elaborate statue of Prince Albert in front of the Royal Albert Hall. Another place that you may recall and locate in this area of the city is Harrods, one of the most famous department stores. A luxurious shop with a lot of interesting products. The next borough is Hammersmith and Fulham. This is perhaps a bit less interesting in terms of tourist attractions, but this is the headquarters of Chelsea Football Club, and also the headquarters of BBC Television. So here we have the building of BBC Television Centre. Next one, we are moving southwards around the city of London. So next one is called Wandsworth, and the two areas there are Battersea and Clapham. Clapham is quite interesting because this is the place with a very complicated train system. Clapham Junction is the area with all those trains going in all kinds of directions. However, probably the most interesting, place in this rather residential and not particularly rich borough is Battersea Park. And here we have a photograph showing perhaps the most characteristic element of the park being the Chinese pagoda. So that's it. Lambeth. Across the river, so we cross the River Thames to go to Wandsworth, from Hammersmith and Fulham to go to Wandsworth, and then We are still on the southern bank of the River Thames, in the borough of Lambeth. Two places you may recall from history, Vauxhall and Brixton. Vauxhall was the place of the pleasure gardens, very fashionable place, a park with a lot of entertainments, very fashionable in the 18th century. Now it houses London Eye, this big Ferris wheel that you can ride to see London from above. It also houses Lambeth Palace. Lambeth Palace is situated more or less across the river from the Houses of Parliament, from the Palace of Westminster. And this is the London residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury being, of course, the head of the Church of England. He has a residence in Canterbury. We'll talk about the Canterbury Cathedral later on, but he spends most of his time, mostly I guess, in London, and this is the official London residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Lambeth Palace, named after the name of this borough. Another borough south of the River Thames is Southwark, and here we have some interesting buildings, like the reconstruction of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre, which still houses interesting theatrical performances. We have the Tower Bridge here, so this very, very famous bridge built in the 19th century. This is a reconstruction. The original Tower Bridge had houses on it, like some of the very old historical bridges in Europe, like the one in Florence, for example, the Ponte Vecchio. It has little houses on it. The original Tower Bridge had similar arrangement, but it was destroyed in the fire. And then in the 19th century it was rebuilt in this very characteristic shape, with the moving street. So it's kind of, there's a bridge that can be moved to allow for the passing of ships, because the River Thames is mostly navigable, and London was a very important port for much of its history, and the ships would actually go almost to the center of the city. So some of the bridges were able to be drawn up to let the ships pass. That's why we have all the dockyards. That's why we have all the areas that used to be parts of the commercial port. Now they are mostly redeveloped, and there are no more big ships coming to London. But this is a relatively recent thing, really. So we have Tower Bridge. This is not London Bridge. London Bridge is another bridge in London. And we have one of the new symbols of the city, the Shard, the highest, the tallest skyscraper in London. Then we cross the river, so we can just walk across Tower Bridge to the borough of Tower Hamlets. And it's quite easy to remember because it houses the Tower of London. So the Tower of London, the original Norman royal residence, then used as a royal prison, now mostly housing a museum and the treasury with the regalia of the Queen. So if you want to see the Queen's crowns and other parts of the regalia, you need to go there. Was built outside of the city of London, as you can see, next to the river. It was approachable from the river, and it still stands. It's one of the best preserved medieval castles in Europe, probably. What else happens in Tower Hamlets? Docklands. The Docklands, so the parts of the original port Now it's completely redeveloped, so there are no commercial ships going there. It's mostly a business center with a very famous part called the Canary Wharf. The wharfs were parts of the port where the ships were loaded and unloaded, where the warehouses were. Now, of course, it's the skyscrapers, and Canary Wharf with this very characteristic tower here, Canary Tower, is probably the most typical of them. This area, generally if we look at it, the areas west of the City of London tended to be richer, and the areas east of the City of London tended to be poorer, and it still stands, and the areas east of the City of London are generally less interesting in the tourist way and less developed. They have less historical monuments. It doesn't mean they are completely uninteresting, sometimes for strange reasons. Like in the borough of Tower Hamlets, we have the notorious East End and the area of Whitechapel, famous, or rather notorious, for the crimes of Jack the Ripper. So now there are even special walking tours to visit the places connected with the crimes of Jack the Ripper. We have a few more boroughs. Next one is Hackney. Parts of East End are there. Stamford Hill is also there. You may know the name because of Hackney Carriage, the typical London cab, the taxi cab. It's sometimes called Hackney Carriage because originally the carriages, the horse-drawn carriages, were produced there. And an interesting place called Jeffrey Museum, which is a museum of the home, of the interior design. So a series of interesting rooms really decorated in the styles of subsequent generations. I've been there. It's free of charge. It's very, very interesting. It's located in an old almshouse, so the lodgings, the quarters for the worthy poor to use there. And I think it was in the 17th century when it was established. So like the veterans, for example, the war veterans or someone like that. And we continue in a moment.